book, so there's more detail in the book, and we can do some questions in the Q&A afterwards if anyone wants to. Are you having a hard time hearing?
Yeah.
So I'm just going to give a brief overview of some of the graphics in the book, and if you have further questions, we can talk about them in the Q&A. So what you're looking at here is a map of the water system. It's a vast system. It's actually one of the largest water systems in the country. And it spans, so just to give you kind of a concept of scale, at the top left corner, that's Flint. So it goes all the way up to Flint, as we now know very deeply. And you can see the black lines there connecting all of the municipalities. That is DWSD's regional water infrastructure. So the city of Detroit built that infrastructure. It's owned by the city, and until last year it was operated by the Department of Water and Sewerage. Now what you're seeing is historical maps of the development of that system. So you can see sort of as the water system grew, it added suburbs that spanned sort of vast region. And so the history of the development of the water infrastructure is very much the history of suburbanization in this region. And an important thing to understand is that the water infrastructure did as much, if not more, than the construction of the freeways to subsidize the growth of the suburbs, which is an often ignored history. This is a map of the wastewater infrastructure. So the city of Detroit handles the wastewater of the entire region that you see on this map, and it's actually all treated at one facility, also one of the largest wastewater treatment facilities in the country, which is in southwest Detroit. So now what you're looking at to the left is a diagram of the way that the city of Detroit sold water to the suburbs before the Great Lakes Water Authority took over. So you can see DWSD sold water to Detroiters at retail rates, and then sold water to suburban water authorities at wholesale rates. And then those water authorities mark up the water and resell them to their residents at retail rates. So a pretty commonly held myth in suburban communities is that the city of Detroit overcharges suburban residents for water. So we decided to kind of take a look at that and break down average water bills for a variety of suburban communities that you can see on the left. So in that graph, that is average annual water bill for residents in these different communities. And the blue portion is the portion that went to DWSD. The black portion went to that local suburban community. Okay, so I mean, it's reasonable to mark up water a certain amount to maintain local infrastructure, but you can see the sort of disproportionate percentages of markups that we're seeing in the way that water was sold. So, okay. There we go. So what you're looking at here is a little translation about what happened when the Great Lakes Water Authority was formed. So to the left, you see the old model where the city of Detroit owned and operated the infrastructure and sold water to the suburban communities. At the top, you see a breakdown of the governance board of that infrastructure. So the Board of Water Commissioners, 4 representatives from the city of Detroit, and 1 each from Macomb, Wayne, and Oakland County. To the right, you see a map of the governance structure of the Great Lakes Water Authority, where really the power and the control over the administration of the water infrastructure is shifted to the hands of the suburban communities. So you see 2 representatives from the city of Detroit, 1 each from Wayne, Oakland, and Macomb counties, and 1 appointed by the governor of Michigan. So I think this map is a good example of the way that regional inequity really shifts the weight of water shutoffs onto communities of color in our region. So we did an analysis of the water shutoff policies for almost every municipality that is on the DWSD water system. And we ranked them from a scale of 1 to 24 based on basically the harshness of the policy. Because what we see is that not every community has the same policy, and in fact, many suburbs actually aren't allowed to shut off water to their residents. So we made a scale that is related to whether or not they shut off water, how long residents have to pay their bill before they're shut off, how much money they have to owe, whether or not they're offered payment plans, and then most importantly, I think also, whether or not discretion is allowed for and whether or not they'll shut off water. So in some communities, they'll just say discretion is provided so that they can sort of decide whether or not they're going to enforce that rule. And then we mapped it against race. And what you can see is that, more or less, where concentrations of African American people are in the region, the harsher water shutoffs are. This is an important map in relationship to what we understand about emergency management in Michigan, which is that the emergency management law is applied almost uniformly to communities of color in the state of Michigan. So what you're looking at here, gold dots are white people, the purple dots are African American people, and the orange dots are people of other races. And then outlined, you can see municipalities that were under emergency management or consent agreements by the state of Michigan. This is especially important in relationship to water shutoffs because water shutoffs spiked drastically under emergency management in Detroit. So in the center of the graph, the yellow hatch is the time period that emergency managers were in control of the city of Detroit. And you can see that almost immediately after Kevin Orr declared bankruptcy on behalf of the city of Detroit, water shutoffs spiked. So this is very much a policy that was introduced and implemented under emergency management, non-democratic rule in the city, and continues even after emergency management is over. Another important thing that I want to mention about this graph is that we basically mapped the number of shutoffs against sort of important moments in history, so emergency management, declaration of bankruptcy, the removal of Flint from the Detroit water system, and also the moments of resistance. And what we noticed is that during moments of really effective community resistance, such as the direct action of the Hammock 9, media campaigns, marches, bringing the United Nations to Detroit, that in those moments actually you can see it decreased the number of shutoffs. The city was supposed to place a moratorium on shutoffs, for instance. In the case of the Hammock 9, they actually successfully stopped the city from being able to shut off water. This is an image that took us 18 months to make because we had a very hard time getting data from the city of Detroit. But it's an image that shows where water shutoffs are impacting communities the most in Detroit. So we mapped it by census block group. And an important thing I want to mention here is that you're not seeing a complete picture of the shutoffs for 2015 because, as Andrew mentioned, we issued multiple FOIAs. A member of the collective sued DWSD. We were continually denied data about where water shutoffs were happening. And we were finally able to stitch together 8 or 9 different FOIA spreadsheets to make a picture. It's not a complete picture because we know that our spreadsheets didn't contain the complete number of shutoffs that were actually happening that year. So we estimate that this is about half of the shutoffs that happened in 2015, but it's the best we can get for now because we're still trying to get the data from the city. And finally, this is the last image I'll show, and in some senses I think the most powerful image that we were able to make. shows the relationship between water shutoffs and tax foreclosures in the city. So what you're looking at is a map of homes that were auctioned in 2014 where water bill debt contributed to the foreclosure of the home. And just to give you a sense of the sort of scale that this is happening in the city, we mapped this by percent of the total housing stock in each census block. So the darkest purple areas of the map, in that census block, 12 to 26% of all of the houses in that area, not all of the foreclosed houses, all of the houses were auctioned in 2014 because water bill debt contributed to the foreclosure of the home. So you can see that unaffordable water bills are not only depriving families of access to water, but they're also displacing families from their homes. So, thank you very much.